laut yang jauh iaitu di Amerika Syarikat, dan yang kedua alhamdulillah kita ada saudara Presiden Angkatan Berislam Malaysia, saudara Faisal Abdul Aziz. Jadi insya-Allah topik global forum kita pada malam ini yang kita akan bincangkan adalah bertajuk Future of Islam and Muslim Communities during the Presidency of President-elect Joe Biden. Jadi pertamanya ingin saya ucapkan terima kasih banyak kepada semua ahli panel kita, iaitu yang pertama Dr. Ermin Sinanović daripada Center for Islam in the Contemporary World, CICW, Shenandoah University, dan kedua kepada panel yang kedua iaitu saudara Faisal bin Abdul Aziz, Presiden Angkatan Berislam Malaysia, ABIM, dan tentu jugalah ingin saya panjangkan terima kasih dan penghargaan kepada penganjur Global Forum pada malam ini, terutamanya kepada ABIM, Wadah, Naduah Ilmuwan dan juga Institut Darul Ihsan IDE. Jadi kepada untuk perhatian tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang sedang menyaksikan Global Forum kita pada malam ini, insya-Allah program Global Forum pada malam ini akan berlangsung lebih kurang sehingga jam 10 malam, dan kita juga turut mengalukan kehadiran Dr. Muhammad Nur Muhammad Manuti selaku pengurusi ICMA, iaitu Ikatan Cendekiawan Muslim Malaysia, yang mana insya-Allah beliau juga akan memberikan sedikit kata-kata aluan sebagai pembukaan forum kita pada malam ini. Saya Muhammad Faridh Hafez bin Muhammad Omar selaku moderator pada malam ini insya-Allah. So first of all, I would like to thanks and also welcome all participants for tonight's forum, Global Forum. So tonight we will discuss about the current issues related to between Muslim community and Islam in relation to what happened in United States in the post of election President-elect of Joe Biden. So our topic tonight is about future of Islam and Muslim communities during the presidency of President-elect Joe Biden. So without further ado, I would like to call Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti, a chairman of ICMA, Ikatan Cendekiawan Muslim Malaysia, and also he is a former president of ABIM, to give opening remark about our discussion tonight, insyaAllah. So I would like to welcome Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti. Please.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Jazakallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulil karim wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Our dear brother moderator, respected brother Ermin from Shenandoah, how to pronounce it? Yeah. A new university nearby Washington DC, our product of International Islamic University, Kuala Lumpur. Our respected brother Faisal, president of ABIM, and all brothers and sisters who are online with us at the moment. Alhamdulillah, thank you very much for ABIM and also for other parties giving me this opportunity to welcome you and to give a little remark with regard to the topic tonight, that is a sort of observation or analysis on the post-USA election recently, and we want to discuss possibilities of policies adopted, which will be adopted by President-elect Joe Biden. Or in Malaysia, we call Pakcik Biden. And also to see the future shape of the Ummah, in particular in USA, among Muslims, and its relation to Islam. And I just want to start this to coin a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which says, "Man lam yahtam bi amril muslimin falaysa minni aw falaysa minna kama qala." Whosoever who do not concern affairs of the Muslim ummah, he is not from me or from us. So with that, I think we are discussing affairs of the ummah globally, where they are in majority or minority, even less than that. Because America is one of the most important superpowers in the world today, a part of Russia, China, and possibilities of other countries like India and Europe as well. So, for me, the post-election, from my observations through media, including from YouTube, among Muslims in America, when they met Biden recently during campaigns, they were expressing their sincere hope to see that their status in America must be respected and their rights must be guaranteed as other citizens in America. And because of that, Biden replied, I do not know whether this is a campaign for election, but I hope it is a real promise which would be better than policies and actions of Trump in the past. So we put hopes, Muslims in USA, Muslims in other parts of the world, we are putting hopes to Biden and his assistant Kamala Harris to respect and also to solve problems of the Muslims in USA, as well as important burning issues among Muslims in the world, in particular Palestine, Rohingya, Kashmir, Uyghur, and so forth. So, with the winning of more than 15 representatives through the election recently, men and women. In fact, this is a very tremendous development for Muslims to express their voices, their rights to House of Representatives, or might be the state House of Representatives. This is a tremendous development which will increase the strength of Muslims Ummah in USA. And with the surge of these strong voices among Muslim representatives and other platforms, this will give a great impact to the overall strategies of Muslims in America, not only in politics, rather we can see also developments in education, in civil society, in social affairs, and so forth. So I would say that our hope is that to see that rights of non-Muslims, right of Muslims, sorry, in USA would be better, inshallah, than before during the era of Biden and Kamala Harris. And of course, we do hope that things which are developing in the world among Muslims, in particular burning issues like Palestine and America as a superpower, people still express their fear whether the regime of Biden would be also favoring the state of Israel, more or less like what Trump did. But still, we are hoping that this can be changed, perhaps from his recent remarks on foreign policies, because we are still waiting the date of 20th of January for President to take oath. Therefore, our hope that the USA Embassy in Baitul Muqaddis, Jerusalem, should be reviewed, to be reshifted, go back to the old capital, that is Tel Aviv, and to see that the issues of settlements, the issues of atrocities in Gaza as well as in Western Banks must be settled amicably in order to see that the resolution of 1967 of UN can be restored again during the administration of Biden. Apart of that, I think there are other related issues among Muslims. a part of Palestine. The whole issue is Kashmir. How Biden regime will deal with the arrogant Prime Minister Modi of India, because situation in Palestine, situation in Kashmir is very deplorable indeed, despite the fact that many countries in the world have condemned India. But what would be the policy of Biden to ease tensions between Pakistan and India, and to settle the issue of Kashmir, and to give rights of Kashmiri back to the origin? Of course, another important issue, the victory almost certain now that Suu Kyi will win the election in Myanmar. Once again, we want to see what would be the fair policy of Biden in order to put pressure on Suu Kyi to give justice to the destitute problem of Rohingya in the country as well as abroad. Apart of that, also another burning issue is that of Uyghur in China. This is, of course, America has to deal with China. Then they have also certain issues with China on bilateral trade, on some recent technological issues. So that I think people of the world, including Muslims, yearning that the regime of Biden must be totally different from the administration of Trump, which we can consider very arrogant to the world, including to Muslims. And perhaps with his humbleness that President Biden combined with Kamala Harris of the Asian origin can respect the voices of suffering people in Asia, first and foremost Palestine, and followed by Kashmir, and the recent atrocity by China among Uyghur in Great China. So that I think our hope that Muslims in America would be better, and better than us, as an Arabic proverb says, "Ahlu Makkata adra bishabiha." Meccan people know all valleys, roads, and streets in the city. So you know better than us how to deal with the new administration, how to strengthen representatives of the Muslims in the Congress, and perhaps also in future. Of course, this is a great hope that you might have also one or two or three senators in the long run, inshallah. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Thank you to Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti on his opening remarks, in which that we can see there are so many issues related to the Muslim and future of Muslim communities, and also Islam in the perspective of global, basically. And then all the issues are related with what we are seeing now in US, when they made the decision to choose a new president-elect of Joe Biden, basically. So although it seems that it's like very impossible to solve all the issues in one forum, however, I do believe that with our respected speaker, Dr. Ermin, and also Brother Faisal, we may get some of insight and also overview with regard to how the future of Muslim and also Islam that we can put for, inshallah. So we will start our forum by now. As we can see right now, we have seen that the United States or American people already choose their new president, Joe Biden, as a 46th president-elect. So by many analysis, already termed that the 2020 US election is the most intense elections process in the US history, with the allegation, although there is an allegation of voter fraud made by the former or current incumbent President Donald Trump, yet Joe Biden had won the election with a very tight numbers, 219 over 232. But however, this forum is not aiming to discuss about the electoral process or about the numbers. However, we try to see in terms of the policies made by under the Joe Biden administration in the future in relation towards Muslim community and Islam, especially in United States and also at the global level. So with that regard, also at the same time as Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti already mentioned about there are more than 50 rest of Muslim already won the US elections in the 2020. So there are certain numbers. For example, 3 of them, Andre Carson, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Talib, were re-elected in this current elections. But in fact, there are new faces and young, like Manuri Turner, 27 years old, Omar Fateh, 30 years old, Madinah Wilson, 27 years old, Nida Alam, 26, were also elected into their respective state house, for example. So towards Dr. Ermin, so before I go forward to the first question in this first session, to all participants, I would like to briefly explain about Dr. Ermin background firstly, in very short. So Dr. Ermin Sinanovic, currently he is Executive Director of Center for Islam in the Contemporary World, CICW, a new research center at Shenandoah University in Virginia. So upon of his education background, he studied for Master of Art and PhD in Political Science at Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, Syracuse University, United States. So before that, he graduated double degree from IIIM in Quran Sunnah Studies and also Political Science. So Dr. Ermin, referring to my introduction, also what has been raised by Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti. So could you respond and also give some of introduction related to our topic tonight, inshallah. So the floor is yours within 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. Thank you to ABIM, to Institute Al-Ihsan, to many other fine institutions in Malaysia that have made this event possible. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you in everything you do and strengthen you. I thank you to my Ustaz teacher, Dr. Nur Manuti, for this wonderful introduction as well. I think he set the stage pretty well for the conversations that we're going to have tonight. He's always been an inspiration from our days as students more than 20 years ago at IIIM, and reading his publications and looking at his work. And we are grateful to have him with us. And we met also a few years ago when he came to visit us in the United States. So it's always good to see you, Ustaz, and many others. So the topic at hand, of course, is very important. I'll start by saying that as an executive director of a nonprofit in the United States, we do not support publicly any candidate. We do not do activism or advocacy. What I'm providing here is my personal capacity and analysis of the situation. So just to sort of put that disclaimer in front. So I'll start by saying that, first of all, overall, from my reading of the pulse of the Muslim community in the United States, I think there is a sense of relief with this election. The majority of Muslims in the United States have voted for Joe Biden. At the same time, some of the early polls and surveys and exit polls show that about 1/3 of Muslims voted for Donald Trump. And that may look, I think, quite interesting and puzzling for a lot of Muslims outside the United States. But it shouldn't be. The Muslims had historically been more inclined toward the Republican Party because of social conservatism and because of the Republican Party more friendly policy towards small businesses. Do not forget that many Muslims in the United States own small businesses and that they are looking for policies, and especially taxation policies, that are conducive to small businesses. And prior to 9/11, majority of Muslims, especially of immigrant background, voted Republican. I think in the elections in the year 2000, when George W. Bush was elected, majority of Muslims voted for the Republican Party. Actually, many people believe that George W. Bush would not have won Florida, which has a pretty sizable Muslim community, without the support of Muslim community. He won that election. He won Florida by 537 vote majority, if you remember. And it's doubtful that he would have done that without support of the Muslim community. Of course, then 9/11 happened, and we know the policies that were enacted after that. And that then led the Muslims in the United States to switch their support to the Democratic Party, because then they felt that the Democratic Party was much better positioned to protect their constitutional and civil rights, and that issues such as social conservatism and business policies, taxation, and so on took the backseat. And this has continued until today. The majority of Muslims in the United States vote for the Democratic Party. This is not at all surprising, especially when President Trump came into office. He announced his Muslim ban policy, the ban on the immigration. At first, it was all Muslim countries, then it was 6 Muslim countries. This was challenged in courts. And what this had created was a situation where, paradoxically, actually, Muslims pretty much became mainstream in American society. I would say that prior to the election of Donald J. Trump, the presidency, the Muslims were still seen somehow on the margins. But actually, it was the election of President Trump that had mobilized Muslims, and not just mobilized Muslims, but had also, in the minds of many Americans, put the Muslims and their concerns in the mainstream of American communities, so that Muslims were seen as a minority that is being oppressed by the government and sort of an underdog. And in a way, the Muslims gained the sympathy among many Americans that they previously lacked. Previously, Muslims were seen through the prism of international politics, especially after 9/11, through the prism of terrorism, the Arab-Israeli conflict. All of these things, the instability in the Middle East, had contributed to people viewing the Muslims through that lens. This didn't change fully and completely. However, what happened after the election of President Trump is that many people started seeing Muslims as American citizens with concerns for their constitutional and civil rights. And the Muslims started entering the mainstream, and we've seen how in the midterm elections in 2018, we had the election of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar into Congress. And now we are seeing, as Dr. Faridh said, we are seeing many of the younger American Muslims entering into politics and being elected in their state legislations, federal states at the state level. And this is going to be a springboard for them to go to the national level, probably in a few years. So we are seeing greater Muslim representation during the presidency of Donald Trump. And so it's a kind of paradox to have that situation. So I just wanted to explain that. President-elect Joe Biden had issued during the campaign agenda for Muslim American communities. He specifically addressed American Muslims in his agenda, something that Donald Trump did not do directly. He did mention here and there that he had the support of Muslims and so on, just like he often says he has support of African Americans and Latino voters, though we know that the majority of such voters do not support President Trump. So what are some of the things that this document, which you can find on the website of President-elect Joe Biden and his campaign, is that number one, he said that if he is the president, his administration will protect civil and constitutional rights of American Muslims. And this is obviously a dig at President Trump, that is often seen as not someone who is fully protective of the constitutional rights and civil rights of the American Muslims. The second thing that this document said is that President Biden is going to honor diversity. And so inclusion and diversity had been the cornerstone of Joe Biden's campaign. This is also seen in his choice for the vice president, Kamala Harris. And on that note, I would like to say that American Muslims are extremely diverse. We come from many different countries of the world. We are not only diverse ethnically and racially, we are also diverse in terms of schools of thought. There are Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims and Ahmadis and many others in America. We are also diverse in our politics. Some Muslims are liberal and progressive, some are middle of the road, some are conservative. So there is no one Muslim body, there is no one Muslim community in America. There is no single organization that represents all Muslims in the United States. That would be pretty much impossible given the diversity that I just talked about. So that's important to keep in mind. When we're talking about Muslims and Muslim interests, the question is, do such things exist? On some issues, maybe we could say that the majority of Muslims may have certain inclinations. Probably the majority of Muslims support Palestinian rights, support the Uyghur rights. But in terms of domestic politics, even when it comes to the issue, for instance, of LGBT and support for same-sex marriage, the recent poll that was done by Pew shows that the majority of young American Muslims actually support same-sex marriage. More than 50% of young American Muslims accept same-sex marriage. And this shows that there's been a value shift in the community. It shows the diversity, and it shows that Muslims also cannot act as a bloc because there is a diversity of interest. The one thing that most Muslims, if not all Muslims, seem to agree on is Muslim civil and constitutional rights need to be protected, that our diversity has to be honored, and that we have to be accepted as equal citizens in the United States with equal access and equal opportunity. And so that seems to be like the basic consensus and the common denominator among the American Muslims. So that is sort of just an overview of American Muslim, the landscape. As you can see, it's very diverse. So that's about American Muslims. I will shift now to foreign policy and global Muslims. And maybe in 5 minutes I will finish, inshallah, trying to keep on time. First of all, I want to say that the United States as a superpower has a continuity in foreign policy. And so many of the things and determinants of US foreign policy are going to continue no matter who is elected, just like they continued when Donald Trump was elected. The United States is still going to have military bases around the world, it's still going to protect its interests, it's still going to have interest in protecting international trade, free flow of ideas, free flow of goods. The United States is going to continue viewing China as an adversary. This doesn't change if Barack Obama, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden is in office. And the United States is going to continue supporting NATO, which it sees as the pillar of Euro-Atlantic security and integration. And on that score, again, even though the rhetoric of President Trump was that NATO members do not pay enough of their dues and that they should increase and all of that, he made pressure. The basic commitments were never changed to NATO. So let us not think that the US policy is going to dramatically shift no matter who is going to get elected. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I would say, and I don't know how many people share that opinion, but if you, I think, analyze it, I think that President Trump has been surprisingly good on foreign policy, overall speaking. What do I mean by that? President Trump has actually scaled down dramatically the US presence in the Middle East. This is something that many people in the Middle East, many Muslims around the world had been calling for. They've been calling for the United States to stop its interventionist policies, to reduce its presence, to leave the people of the Middle East to decide on their own. And this is pretty much what President Trump has done. Actually, President Trump has been much, much less interventionist than President Obama. President Obama was the one president that started using drone assassination policies, and especially in Afghanistan and Pakistan, hundreds, if not thousands, were assassinated that way. That policy had continued under President Trump, but it has been scaled down. So on those issues, I think President Trump has been surprisingly good, and it is something people do not often notice because we view President Trump's presidency through this notion of Muslim ban and his crudeness often in public discourse and the language that he uses and his attacks against minorities and so on, that we often forget that some of his policies were actually quite different than many of his predecessors, than Obama, George W. Bush, President Clinton, and others before them. That's one thing. The other thing is that when it came to light that China was committing genocide against the Uyghur population, creating all those massive concentration camps, Trump's administration was one of the first countries in the world that publicly called out China and publicly called for stopping that kind of policy. Even at the time, and still it's true, that most Muslim countries do not publicly condemn China. Most Muslim countries, even today, do not publicly condemn China. The United States, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, had frequently condemned China for its policy and asked them to stop it. So that is something that I think needs to be also acknowledged at the same time. And this is what we mean by objective analysis, right? Is to move away from emotionalism and to look at the facts and see what's going on. And similar thing, maybe less vocal, but similarly, the United States has been vocal about condemning the Myanmar regime and its genocidal policies against the Rohingya population over there. So I would say that on those issues, Trump had actually made a positive qualitative shift, even compared to Obama administration. The one issue, though, where Donald Trump doubled down on U.S. support was the issue of Israel and Palestine, right? So on that issue, Trump had been probably the most vocal supporter of Israel among American presidents, and competition is strong. Almost every American president always goes out of his way to state an equivocal support of the United States for the state of Israel. Trump has taken that up a notch. So, and that's telling, and obviously, as Ustaz Nur Mamouti said, we have the issue of moving and shifting a U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, to Beit al-Maqdis. My assessment is that that's not going to change with Biden's election. I don't think Biden is going to change on that. Actually, President Obama's first memoir just came out, and in the early excerpts, I read about him saying that standing up to Israel carries dramatic domestic cost for American politicians, including the president. So he said any candidate that criticizes the state of Israel will in the next election be met with a well-funded candidate that will be funded heavily in order to replace that particular candidate who is criticizing the state of Israel. We even have that situation now. There is a runoff election for Senate in Georgia, the two seats that could, if Democrats win, flip the Senate in the favor of the Democrats. And one of the candidates has now been critiqued heavily by the supporters of Israel for issuing statements before that were supportive of the Palestinians. So there is a dramatic domestic cost to be paid by those who are advocating for Palestinian rights, or at least highlighting some of the abuses of the occupation. Joe Biden had stated unequivocally during his campaign that he's a supporter of the state of Israel, and I don't think anything fundamental is going to change in that regard. There's another issue that, for me personally, also is very important, and that is politics toward the Balkans, especially in Bosnia and Kosovo. In that regard, I think Biden is a very good choice for the Muslims of the Balkans. He had been, since the 1990s, very vocal supporter of the governments of Bosnia and later on Kosovo. He was supporting intervention against Serbia. He immediately called Slobodan Milošević a war criminal. He was very vocal in the Senate and in his public speeches about the atrocities that were taking place against the Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo. He even went on as far as to say that he said, we are not doing anything because these people are Muslims. If these people were not Muslims, we would do something about it. So this was more than 20 years ago. This was Joe Biden as a senator. Does he still have that same fire in him today? That remains to be seen. However, what we know is that he had issued statements that are in many ways supportive of the Muslims of the Balkans, and that there is hope, especially in Bosnia, that when Joe Biden becomes officially president of the United States, that he might actually continue strengthening Bosnia as a country and its institutions, and as a result, strengthening the positions of the Muslims there and seeking greater recognition, integration into NATO, which I think is something that is very important for Bosnian Muslims because they see that as a protection against the possible aggression from the neighbors. So overall, it's a mixed bag. On the issue of Israel and Palestine, I don't see much difference with Biden than any other. I think the U.S. administration is going to continue exerting some pressure on China, but they are limited in what they can do. China is just too powerful and is not going to listen to anybody. So all they can do is perhaps highlight the issue of the Uyghurs, but I don't think any change is going to happen. On India, we haven't heard that much. Kamala Harris is half Indian. Her mother is Indian. I do not know exactly where she stands on Modi and his policy. So it remains to be seen if the United States is going to exert any pressure on Indian government with regard to not just Kashmir issue, but overall their attitude toward Muslim minority in India had been horrendous. And the Muslim minority in India is living in fear today under Modi. So these are the kind of things that I think we need to keep an eye on. There are still many unknowns. I think once we know the constitution, the setup of Biden's cabinet, who's going to be his Secretary of State, who's going to be his special envoys for the Middle East, for Balkans, and so on, I think we will know more. That will indicate intent, and we will know more about the possible policies in these parts of the world. So it's still too early, and obviously governing is a different thing than campaigning. So it's one thing to say something during the campaign, it's another thing to govern and to actually run the government. So it remains to be seen how President-elect Biden is going to handle all that. But basically in 15 to 20 minutes, that's about as much as I could say. And I hope that this was useful and helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ermin. Alhamdulillah, thank you for your insightful explanation about the topics that we are discussing tonight. Alhamdulillah. I think since we already listened to Dr. Muhammad Normatui that he mentioned about the future hope of Muslim and Islam. However, once we listen to Dr. Ermin's explanations, we suddenly change our mood into something like in dilemma in terms of where that Joe Biden's foreign policy will bring Muslim community, especially either Muslim in the United States and also Muslim outside the United States. So, however, thank you for your notes and also for your explanations with regard to Joe Biden's maybe in future his policy, and also there is no such of the differences between Joe Biden and Trump, although they are slightly different in certain issues. However, we still need to put some of keep an eye, as you mentioned earlier, that we have to wait and see what Joe Biden administration will put forward on Islam and Muslim community at the global level, inshallah. So now we change to our second speaker, our beloved brother Muhammad Faisal Abdul Aziz, who is now a 10th president of Angkatan Balik Islam Malaysia or Muslim Youth Movement in Malaysia, ABIM, and a little bit about his background. He was graduated from IIIM, also a double degree in law and also Sharia. And then he pursuing his master degree in law from UITM. And he is also a former president of PKPIM, Persatuan Kebangsaan Pelajar Islam Malaysia. And recently, he just passed his baton or just stepped down from his vice presidency position in Bersih 2.0, which is a NGO that so-called promoting clean and clear electoral reform in Malaysia. So now, Brother Faisal, as for the introduction from Malaysian Muslim perspective, in 15 minutes, what would you say on the topic given in relation to uncertainty of Malaysian politics right now, and also why do we as a Malaysian or Muslim in Malaysia keep our eye into US election, especially in the post of Joe Biden administration? So now, Brother Faisal, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wasahbihi ajma'in. A very good evening to all Malaysians. Good morning to our fellow friends from United States. My esteemed panelists, my teacher, Dr. Ermin Sinanovic, the Executive Director for Center for Islam in Contemporary World, CICW, Shenandoah University, and Director of Research and Academics of the IIIT. My respected guru or teacher, Dr. Mohd, the former president of ABIM and the chairman of IJMA, who enlightened us on the pressing issue in Kashmir, Uyghur, which has also something to do with the US policies, especially when it comes to foreign policies. And my respected brother, Dr. Faridh Omar, the moderator for today's discussion. Alhamdulillah, of course, this program indeed in line with the spirit of Hadith Prophet Muhammad SAW, as what was said by Dr. Mohd, Man la yahtamma bi amri Muslim, falaysa minhum. Whoever does not care or concern about the Muslims is not one of them. So we are delighted to have Dr. Ermin and all brothers and sisters in the US to shed some light, especially when it comes to the future landscape of Islam in US post Joseph Biden era. All right, to answer or as introduction, I would like to set the discussion to the perhaps the main question: why the recent US presidential election attracted so much attention from the entire world, including Muslims in Malaysia. But before that, I stand corrected for any mistakes of fact that come from my discussion. All right, I would like to start with the first reason, which is the character of Donald Trump himself, where is the one who was frequently accused of riding on the image of right wing to the extent of causing and exacerbating the racial and religious tension in the US. And at the same time, Trump also managed to gain substantial support from the people, despite the fact that we have seen Trump was not a champion of progressive democracy as seen throughout his presidency. And if I may quote, this has something to do with what was said by Francis Fukuyama, his book Identity, where he introduced the term of demos, which expressed the human desire for recognition. And within the American context, it is about the right wing, which represented the majority of the people, felt victimized or persecuted by the current systems. Hence, they needed a hero to cling on and to save the day. So having this kind of issue of identity or identity politics, it gave some so-called license for Trump to aggravate the racial issues by riding on the sentiments of Islamophobia and, of course, xenophobia. But of course, we are now in the mode of wait and see how much Joe Biden will do to mend the mistakes of Trump's administration when it comes to, as I said, the Muslim ban, and also the issue of xenophobia, or issue the Black Matters, and also Islamophobia. And I couldn't agree more with Dr. Ermin if we discuss this matter from the perspective of foreign policy, where in certain issues, yes, I do agree with Dr. Ermin. Comparatively, Joe Biden with Donald Trump, Joe Biden has had a poor reputation when it comes to aggression and use of force, and all of us have known where the world noticed that Biden had a big role in the launch of the Iraq War, and he himself voted for the war. So yes, of course, in that sense, Trump could be perceived as better than Biden when it comes to the foreign policy voted for aggression and use of force. From the United States. Second, I think it is very important to note as well the issue of trade war between the US and China, which will result in the instability of the global economy if this trade war is prolonged. Yes, of course, given the pandemic, COVID-19, and of course, all of us have been suffering from. And of course, the trade war, people associated this with the arrogance of Trump. And of course, it will continue. It is presumed that the trade war will continue if Trump remains in power. So, Joseph Biden, on the other hand, despite being perceived as inward-looking in terms of economy, for instance, endorsing buying American products, supporting the local industries, but he represents the Democrats, which is seen as more engaging with others, with the rest of the world. For example, if I may share, Barack Obama's legacy on TPP agreement was widely regarded as an effort to find business partners with outsiders. Yes, but of course, anyway, ABIM, we still have, until now, some reservations on terms and conditions of the TPP, but that's the other story. So perhaps during Biden's administration, we can see the return of the US as a leading force in international arena. And it is a kind of reversal of Trump era of isolationism, as demonstrated in its pulling out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, and also the Paris Agreement. Okay, my third point is the international community still largely look at the US as reference and indicator of human rights and democracy, even though we also have seen the image had tarnished due to loopholes in the democratic process or in the democratic practices. And we can see the explicit example through the heavy discrimination on the pretext of racial and religious references, just by riding on the sentiments of, as I said before, Islamophobia and xenophobia. And the fourth, the possible victory of Biden with the sizable support from the minority groups, such as Muslims and the Black communities, it reflects a likely transition from the right-wing populism to a more moderate climate. But yeah, of course, as I said, we are still in the mood of wait and see how far Biden will be more progressive as compared to Trump when he hold the power position. And the last but not least, it is very important from the perspective of Muslims throughout the world, where yes, Muslims throughout the world now are in the mode of wait and see to monitor how far Joseph Biden will act fairly towards Muslims in the US and abroad. And one of the promises, and if I may refer back to the promises made by Biden, first to terminate the Muslim ban on his first day in office. And this statement was followed by his vow on October 15 that Muslim Americans will be included in every social and political aspect in his administration. And it is undeniable that there is a high expectation from Muslims towards Biden, and this can be seen through the percentage. 69% of Muslims voted for Biden. Besides, there is also positive expectation from Muslims abroad, in which they wish to see how far Biden will amend or terminate, of course, for example, the deal of century and other foreign policies during Trump administration that are explicitly biased to Israel. And of course, as what was pointed out by Dr. Ermin, it is difficult to see any changes when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to the biased policy to Israel. But at the end of the day, we still have to keep in check. And I think the role of the MPs or the representation of the Muslims, the newly elect representation from Muslims, they have to play their active role to keep in check, to ensure that Joe Biden will keep his promise, hold on to the principles of justice, to act fairly towards Muslims, either in America or abroad. It is hope, as my conclusion, all in all, based on, as I said, the character of Trump, plus his regressive policies, international citizens are interested. I think it is a fact. International citizens are interested in tweeting or posting something about Biden in social media. When they tweet or posting something about Biden, this not purely reflect their support for Biden, but more than desire to ask Trump out from the White House. So that 5 main reasons why Muslims around the world, especially including in Malaysia, we are keen to know, we are attracted to know about this recent US presidential election. So that's all from me. Thank you, Dr. Faridh.
Right, thank you to Brother Faisal upon his introduction on the topic given. Alhamdulillah, Brother Faisal already outlined certain important points which related to the how US elections 2020 is really important in the Muslim eyes, especially among the Malaysian Muslim here in Malaysia. So although there are some of the influence of media, social media platform, also the way how we perceive the election of Joe Biden's campaign in terms of he promised to uplift the ban towards the Muslim and others promises given by him. That makes some of the Malaysian Muslim here very attractive and also keep an eye to see further about the foreign policy that will make by the Joe Biden and his team. So now, Alhamdulillah, we already have 2 questions here. Now our time's already 9:34. I think I will change slightly the way how I conduct this forum. So here there are 2 questions towards Dr. Ermin. First questions here from Zainul and Sadia. I think I will go direct to the questions from the audience here. Could Dr. Ermin Sinanovic explain again with regard to Barack Obama's comment on having a high domestic cost for US politicians not showing clear support to Israel or for showing support for Palestinian cause? What are the costs for not showing this clear support for Israel? And then second question also to Dr. Ermin, during Trump administration, the engagement and involvement of US in Asian affairs has been lukewarm compared to previous administration. How do you envisage Joe Biden's policy to Asia, which recently signed RCEP with other partners, including China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand? So I think, Dr. Ermin, you may respond to this question first. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the questions. Thank you, Brother Faisal, for your remarks. I think we all learned a lot and they were really excellent. The first question, what are the costs? Well, the costs are, in the United States, you cannot, I think that's true in any country, but especially in the United States, you cannot get elected without a lot of money. To run a campaign, to run a successful campaign in a big country like the United States, you need a lot of money, which means you need many donors, you need donations and things like that. If somebody expresses support or even criticism, even mild criticism of Israel or support for the Palestinians, in a way that displeases the Israel lobby in the United States, and of course, two leading political scientists, Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer, had written a book almost 15 years ago on the Israel lobby and their power in American politics. That person risks losing that financial support. Not only that, but then the opponent will be heavily funded by pro-Israel lobby. When I say pro-Israel lobby, I do not mean only some Jewish groups that are active in American politics, like AIPAC, but I also mean here evangelical groups, Christian evangelicals, who are intent on supporting the state of Israel and many others. So those are the domestic costs. The domestic costs could lead to loss of a seat, whether in the Congress, Senate, state Congress, no matter where that seat is. And it could lead also to accusations of anti-Semitism. And that in the United States is a very big accusation. If someone is accused of anti-Semitism, then that person has to spend half of their time and energy defending themselves against that accusation, as opposed to trying to, to promote their own policies and agendas and ideas and so on. And so the cost is really high. It drains energy. It creates a perception that this person is intolerant, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. And for that reason, that leads to a loss of financial support. And it could also lead to a loss of support in terms of votes. A lot of people may decide not to vote for that candidate again. So there's a number of things that happens, but ultimately the sum total of all of this is that that person is pretty much has a hard time to establish himself or herself in politics for that reason. So for that reason, a lot of people just avoid any criticism of Israel and avoid voicing out their support for Palestinians, which only perpetuates then the occupation and the abuses against the Palestinian people. So that's as much as I would want to say about that. The second one, it's been interesting to watch. The Trump administration, remember during Obama administration when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, they were talking about this pivot to Asia, which really never fully materialized. And then the Trump administration had left itself in a very unsettled position toward China, especially in South China Sea, in relationship to ASEAN. Secretary of State and Minister of Defense had participated in Shangri-La dialogues. And a few years ago, they made a pretty good speech about that, but then there was no follow-up. Another thing that is really puzzling about U.S. policy in the Southeast Asian region and the whole that wider South China Sea region is that the United States during Trump administration did not have an ambassador in Singapore. There was chargé d'affaires, but there was no ambassador. And Singapore has always been strategically a very important country for the U.S. interest in the region. So not having an ambassador in Singapore was really puzzling and hard to explain. And then came at the end of all of that. So the United States has been trying to engage with the Quad in the region, perhaps trying to engage Japan, Australia, even India to bring into some sort of a counterbalance to China, but nothing really came out of that. And I think for a few years, ASEAN countries had adopted wait-and-see policy, where they didn't want to antagonize China on the one hand, but they didn't want to abandon historic ties relationship with the United States. What I think we are seeing with RCEP is that ASEAN countries are shifting toward China. Is that shift permanent? It remains to be seen. But if it becomes permanent, then Trump could be in the future called the president that lost Asia and Southeast Asia to China. We do not know if that shift is permanent, but I think that it's very concerning. I personally think that the rise of China is a very concerning thing. We see the Chinese domestic policies toward Uyghur Muslim minority. The Belt and Road Initiative is meant not so much to help the countries that are part of that, but basically to establish China's footprint in those countries. And China is working diligently and over time to do that. And so I'm watching this with concern, and I do not know if Biden has a policy that will dramatically shift these calculations that have been created during Trump presidency and in the last few months. And what is also symptomatic and what is also hard to understand is that the United States pretty much did not make any public statements on RCEP. It's been left out. It's almost like the U.S. foreign policy is an autopilot now, and Trump is not focused on governing. He's just focused on his own theatrical appearances. Just a follow-up question to answer to Zainul and Sadia. How do we explain the rise of young Muslim politicians? I think there's been a generational shift in the United States that the younger generation across the board, not just the Muslims, which I already indicated, that we have now these young Muslims elected to state legislations and so on, are not tied to the kind of interests and issues that the previous generation was. So it used to be given that the United States and its people in general are going to be unequivocal supporters of the state of Israel. With the younger generation, that's not the case. With the rise of social justice concerns, Black Lives Matter, many people are seeing how these struggles of the Black people in America and struggles of the Palestinians in the Middle East are connected. They are part of the same sort of dispossession of certain populations under the expansive regimes. And so for that reason, I think among the younger population, you are seeing much stronger support for social justice issue, including the Palestinian issue. And among such population, I think the accusations of anti-Semitism, the accusations that someone is against the state of Israel do not carry as much weight as before. So in that sense, we are seeing a shift, but it's only happening in certain areas. It doesn't happen everywhere. It happens in areas where you have that kind of population that is a little bit more, for lack of a better word, cosmopolitan, a little bit more open-minded. So there are still many areas in the United States where an election of a Muslim would not be possible, I think. But there are now increasingly these kind of shifts. So are these shifts permanent? Again, remains to be seen, but there's definitely been. And for that reason, like I said, Trump presidency had created paradoxically space for these type of concerns that previously did not exist. Even under Obama, criticizing the state of Israel, and that's what he refers to in his memoir, had been very difficult, right? But under Trump, in a way that Trump doubled down on support for Israel, more people in the United States started questioning that support. And I think that that sort of translated into these type of issues that we are seeing today.
Okay, thank you to Dr. Ermin's viewpoint, his response to the questions posted by our audience here. So now I change to our brother Faisal for the second question from me, because of there is no questions to you. So for my question in second part is related to the young generation or young Muslim politician in US already, as mentioned by brother Ermin. So maybe I would like to know about how this kind of Joe Biden presidency will affect Malaysian Muslim as a whole, and also why this kind of Muslim communities in US are really important to us in Malaysia. that we have to put forward, or we put our eye on them basically. So where this kind of Muslim community in US will lead Muslim community in Malaysia, especially in terms of maybe foreign policy or politics or democracy or equal treatment or justice, for example.
All right, thank you, Dr. Faridh. Before I answer that question, please allow me to give a quick comment on the issue of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that between China and several countries, signed on 10th of November 2020. All right, we can now presume that the new president-elect's priority is to tackle the pandemic and economic fallout. And given the current economic meltdown across the world, Biden's big agenda for economy and is to increase the tax to people earnings 400,000 a year and above, which represents the top 1.8% of taxpayers. So this plan indicates that a country such as the US, that is always referred as a giant in economy, still has to deal with the problem of revenues that they need to increase. And in relation to that, I do believe Biden will follow Barack Obama's legacy when Barack Obama drafted the TPP agreement. And as we know, the issue of RCEP, when the China has made a fast move following the cancellation or the termination of TPP previously, on which we discussed now about the RCEP, the agreement. So, of course, the RCEP will be the major step for the US government to find new way of economic partnership during the current economic stability. And I do believe that the new leadership of Biden will be more engaging and open to find common grounds with other countries, including Malaysia and Southeast Asia or ASEAN countries, in solving the current global economic turmoil. Okay, referring back to Dr. Farid's questions on why Muslims in US is perceived as important, from the eyes of the Muslim in Malaysia or around the world. I think we have to note that statistically, people go abroad. The statistic or the number of people who study abroad and remain or who desire to stay abroad is significantly high. If I may refer one book written by Ziauddin Sadar, Jordi Serra, and Scott Jordan, Muslim Societies in Post-Normal Times, it indicates the record which recorded many countries, Muslim countries, such as Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Nigeria, Malaysia, especially among the youth, they try to find education abroad, and they desire to remain in their in that country after graduation. And in this specific case is United States of America, US. So this phenomenon had a tremendous impact on the future of Muslim when it shifted the paradigm that previously regarded the Middle East or Southeast Asia or generally the global South as the center of Islam to a new direction of Islam that is global North. Again, I stand corrected if it is wrong, but it shifted the paradigm. So the issues of Muslims in Malaysia or Muslim around the world in general are now intertwined with the Muslims in the US, and both sides can relate more with one another. And the current controversial issues, for example, the Muslim Prayer Acts, Muslim Pro, for instance, it shows that how Muslims, we share, especially among the youth, we share the same facilities, we share the same updates, we subscribe the same tazkirah, the sermons, and so on. And this includes the role of Muslim YouTubers, Insta-famous, the bloggers, and other social media influencers who share their views and interests with the rest of the world and find the common values with their audience. So any progress or updates about Muslims in the US has certain impacts on Muslims in Malaysia. And we can see now trend. So this kind of trend, the new way of universal Islam, especially in terms of the way of Muslim youth look at certain issues with the perspective that are widened than and references which are based on the common universal values rather than the local context. So having pointed out the statistics just now, we can see the growing in terms of number among the Muslim youth to go abroad and to remain in the United States. And of course, now it is significantly high, even from the Muslim in Malaysia, especially in the urban area, to find like Tazkirah or Asatiza who are English-speaking background. They subscribe, as I said, YouTube, or they ask the questions through Instagram, through certain Asatiza from the US. So they have now share something in common. And of course, as I said, as I pointed out just now, the issue of Muslims in US, in Malaysia, all around the world are now perceived as intertwined each other. So we have something more that can be related one another. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Faridh, may I add something to this?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ermin. You can add and then just include your final words, final remarks before we end our forum.
All right, so I'll do that. Together. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Brother Faisal that the U.S. Muslims are increasingly having a global role to play. The United States is a global superpower. Its culture is pervasive, as we know, from our children, from observing around, from all the major social media come from the United States. The language of the social media is English. Pop culture is primarily produced in the United States, with the exception of K-pop and some other things, but for the most part, it's the US. The movies that people watch are, again, disproportionately American movies. And so American culture through that has a tremendous impact all around the world. American Muslims being part of the United States are no different. So they become part of that global power of the United States. And I like what Brother Faisal highlighted, which is that American Muslims are increasingly now speaking not just to American Muslims, but they are speaking to Muslims globally. All around the world, people are listening to lectures of Omar Suleiman, of Hamza Yusuf, of many other American Muslim thinkers, leaders, preachers, for better or worse. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not always good, because the concerns that they may have may be different. I think this is a challenge for people who are in different countries to make themselves relevant, to speak the language that especially the younger people understand. The younger people do not want any longer the old ustaz type of lectures, where the ustaz opens the book and just reads from it and acts as if this is the truth and nothing else can be questioned, because people can go online and they can find different opinions. They can listen to other preachers and say, well, you may say this, but I heard that. So that old style preaching simply cannot do it in today's world. And we are continuing that to our own detriment if we continue it, So we need to adopt a new language. As we know, of course, the famous saying of Sayyidina Ali ibn Talib radiallahu anhu, خاطب الناس على قدر عقولهم. Speak to people according to the level of their understanding, meaning use the language they understand. Do not try to use a language they don't understand. And the young people today speak a different language than I used to speak 20 years ago. And definitely people 30, 40, 50 years ago, at the beginning of the Islamic revival in Malaysia in the 70s and the 80s, was a totally different discourse and different language. So I think we need to adapt to these changes, and we need to be able to present the message of Islam in a way that is understandable. And like Brother Faisal said, people are now interested in more kind of universal approach to Islam, not a very particular localist approach to Islam. Not everybody, but many, especially among the urban educated population, they want something new, something different. They want to see Islam not simply as a set of rules and talk about halal and haram, but also about many different issues and how Islam touches on wider community concerns, issues of social justice, even issues of equality and so on. And I think this is very important to understand. My final remarks are that, yes, definitely, I would say overall, on balance, the election of Joe Biden is definitely better for American Muslims than the election of Donald Trump. Joe Biden is going to, as he promised the first day of his presidency, he's going to invalidate the Muslim ban. He's going to open up the borders of the United States a little bit more in line with the previous administrations. He's going to include American Muslims at every level of administration. He even went so far to say that he's going to have at least one Muslim member of his cabinet. That remains to be seen, but this obviously is very, very different than Donald Trump. In terms of foreign and global policy, like I said, and I still repeat that, we're not going to see major difference. We may see difference on some minor issues or select issues in certain parts of the world, but I don't see overall this is going to change. I think the United States, one thing we didn't mention, I want to mention now, the United States is still going to promote status quo, for instance, in the Middle East, which means support for authoritarian and dictatorial regimes for the most part. Is not going to stand for democracy and promote democracy especially in the Arab majority countries. There is no indication that that is going to change. So on that score, I think we are to expect more continuity, and let's see, once we see the constitution, the setup of Biden's cabinet, we're going to know more on where the U.S. foreign policy is going to go. I thank you again all for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure talking to all of you and seeing many of you again, Brother Faridh, Ustaz Nur Manuti, many others, Brother Faisal, and many others. And inshallah, I hope to continue this conversation with you in future.
Alhamdulillah, thank you to Dr. Ermin on your concluding remarks and also your insightful points with regard to our tonight's discussions. And before we end, also, I would like to invite Brother Faisal to give 2 or 3 minutes concluding remarks before we end our forum. Please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Faridh. Yeah, I think as what we have discussed, the conclusion is more or less similar to those times since my school days. People always say that U.S. presidential election, nothing produce any concrete or progressive action. But of course, at the end of the day, perhaps we as Muslims, we can give the benefit of the doubt to Biden to do some perhaps reform or change, and at least to fulfill his promise to be more progressive in terms of respecting the people of colors and also respecting Muslims and other vulnerable groups of people, including refugees. So, for your info, ABIM, we have issued our official statement on the day after the President-elect Joseph Biden was announced as the winner. And of course, our main point concerned on the foreign policies, as what was said just now. And also, we also touched on the issue of interfaith and inter-ethnic relations, where ABIM urged the new leadership of the US to terminate any policies that were oppressive towards the minorities, like Muslims, people of colors, and so on. And we do believe, even wherever we believe, during the period of Trump, even during the period of Biden, we as Muslims, we are part of the community of the world. At the end of the day, we are human beings. We, as people, we want to work together under the name of humanity to succeed in our own lives. And if you ask me whether I would like to congratulate Biden or not, yeah, as what was said in our official statement, it is certainly premature to conclude that Joe Biden is better than Trump, but at least perhaps from the tone of the presidential campaign, we shall reserve some. We shall reserve him the benefit of the doubt for now. So I hope for the best, for the better, and we as Muslim in Malaysia, we always keep praying for the betterment of the Ummah, our brothers and sisters in the US. We hope to always keep in touch, and we hope to live happily. And of course, we should not undermine the potential of the Muslim in the US. As I said, it could be the trendsetter for Muslim youth from the global north, when we have the Yasser Qadi, Omar Sulaiman, and so on. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ermin, and our brothers and sisters from US and also from Malaysia.
Alhamdulillah.
Nice to see you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you to Brother Faisal for his concluding remarks. Alhamdulillah, we came to an end for our global forum tonight. Alhamdulillah, I do hope to all participants who listen to the discussion got very the important and also insightful information regarding the future of Islam and Muslim community during the presidency of President-elect of Joe Biden. So, as mentioned by Ustaz Muhammad Nur Manuti at earlier of our discussion, when he mentioned about the hadith from Prophet Muhammad, "Man la yahtamu bi amr muslimin falaysa minhum." So, at the last of this discussion, I will put an end in terms of the future of Islam and the Muslim community is on our hand, is in our hand. In the US, Alhamdulillah, we can see there are changes in terms of the way how people, the community accept the Muslim new rights, especially the young generation. However, in the Muslim global world, in the Muslim world, in the Middle East and also in Malaysia, Indonesia, part of in our Southeast Asia region, the changes seems slightly quite slow to change. However, we cannot never put this kind of hope at top of our missions. So inshallah, I do believe that in the coming future 3 to 5 years, inshallah, the changes what was happened in the US also will give some of, as Brother Faisal mentioned, as a trendsetter to the global young Muslim to participate in politics in order to design the foreign policy that will uplift the issue of social justice, equality, right, and also the other thing that really to promote a betterment of one ummah or the betterment of the world, inshallah. So the last point from me, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti and also to our panelists, Dr. Ermin Sinanović from the CICW and also Brother Faisal, President of ABIM, and also to all organizers. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you to all participants. Inshallah, we'll see you again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mengapa kini terjadi, jiwa tertekan menghitung hari. Mungkinkah kini semakin menyiksa, di balik dinding dia bercerita. Kehidupanmu penuh cabaran, saban hari diserang sudut jiwa. Siang dan malam terus tertekan, menagih redha Maha Esa. Biar langkah terus gelora, juang kita di medan sahut gembira. Lemah dan seksa tidak peduli, demi bantuan rakyat Malaysia. Walau dipanah kilat diuji, dirimu akan terus berusaha. Sumbang tenaga demi nyawa, sejahtera bersatu